Welcome back, darlings. Today is day 7 and our finale of Halloween week. This one is special for 2 reasons. First reason is these are all written by 242 herself. The second is we're joined by a bunch of other narrators, like Hair-Raising Narratives, Miss Creepy Tales, Kowai Poltergeist, As the Raven Dreams, PA Nightmares, and last but never least, Serafin, the Midnight Bard. So, turn off your lights, make sure your doors and windows are locked. Things are about to get spooky. The Shortcut by 242. It was a chilly October evening. The leaves covered the path before her, bright orange and red, muted by long shadows of the sun escaping into the west, just about to disappear altogether. She pulled her green hood over her head, the cold sneaking its way into the air already. The park was empty, and she knew the snow would be soon to come. A week max was her guess, which means the shortcut would be no good for 2 days like always. The soft crunch of the leaves under her feet filled her with joy. She truly loved autumn, and the end would be soon. Her heart stopped as she heard a second crunch behind her. She hadn't seen anyone since she entered. She turned to look behind her, but the sun had finally fallen completely behind the horizon, and she saw nothing that could have made a sound like that. She felt nervous, and she began to pick up her pace. The crunching of the leaves and her heartbeat was all she could hear. The trees grew thicker around her, and since all the light she had was the street lamps, it made them look eerie, as if reaching out to her. "Ouch!" she screamed as a branch caught her arm, ripping her sleeve. She put her hand over the area. She pulled back her hand to see red covering it. Really? Her steps became faster since she wanted to get home now and wrap that arm. Another branch hit her face and cut her cheek. Her eyes shot up and she noticed all the trees had gotten closer to her, like they were reaching for her. Without thinking, she put her arms before her face and ran forward. The pain was intense as the branches cut up her arms like dull knives. She could feel the warmth of her own blood running down her arms, but she didn't stop till she was out of the trees. Once she was safe, she looked at her arms covered in cuts, and her sleeves were just barely holding it together. The cuts were not the worst she had felt, but they hurt, and the cold air did not help. She stood there, trying to get her head around what had just happened. She heard the crunching of the leaves once more. She turned her head, and this time what she saw almost made her scream. A being made of what looked like leaves and broken branches stood before her. Its orange, glowing eyes looked at her. It reached a hand out, and leaves flew at her. She didn't have time to react as they cut her face up. She turned and started to run through the park, almost to the exit in her home. The creature followed behind her, and she could feel the leaves cutting at her back, the hot blood running down her legs. The moment she stepped out of the park, it all stopped. She turned back and saw nothing. Everything looked like a normal late autumn evening. With that, her shortcut became a place she would never step a single foot in again. Trick or Treat. The crescent moon hung in the star-splattered night sky. Not a cloud could be seen as the people on the street walked around. It was full of children in costumes, and some adults wore some as well. 3 boys ran from a house laughing. Each of them opened their bags to see their goodies.
"Full size,"
yelled the one in the Wolverine costume.
Fred, he gave us full size. We have to hit that one again, bub.
The one that was wearing the Batman costume closed his bag, nodding.
Oh yeah, we're going to, Will. Unless your mom calls you back early, Jamie.
The boy pulled his red gloves up for his Saitama costume.
She said I could be out till 10. We have lots of time, so let's do it.
Fred smiled and turned to the next house.
Then let's see what this one's got.
The house had tombstones throughout the yard. Each one had a skeleton pulling themselves out of the ground as moans played. This house was always very spooky, and many little kids stayed away, but not them. They were brave after all. Fred walked to the door first, and the other two followed him. He knocked as the other two got into position. As the door opened, all three screamed,
Trick or treat!
An old lady stood before them. Had to be 100, smiling her toothless smile. "Oh, hello there." She pulled a handful of candy out of her bowl. "I see we have a Wolverine. Good choice," she said as she put the handful of candy in his bag. "I see we have a Batman." The woman put another handful into his bag. She reached in and took a third as she turned to Jamie, looking puzzled. "Who might you be?" Jamie looked at her, to her handful of candy. It felt like she was holding it back till he told her.
Saitama from One Punch. He's a superhero as well.
Jamie said sheepishly. The old lady nodded and let go of the candy with that. "A group of superheroes. The city is safe tonight. Have a good night and make sure you're good." She closed the door when they turned to leave. They looked at each other before looking into their bags. She had given them a huge amount of candy compared to most houses. Jamie looked back at the house.
That was really odd.
Fred laughed a little.
She must just like to know what the costumes are or something.
Will nodded as he looked around the street.
Some people are odd. Now, let's head to the next street over.
All three of them nodded and took off to the next street. Time passed quickly. It was 9:30 as they headed back towards home, aiming to go to the old lady and the full candy bar one before giving up the night. Will looked at Jamie.
You still good?
He asked with concern. Jamie nodded.
Yeah, I feel really good today. I just wish every day was like today.
His voice was happy at first, but turned sad at the end. Fred put his arm around Jamie.
Don't worry, you'll beat it. And we'll have tons of nights like this.
He smiled at his friend.
You're Saitama, after all. One punch and it's done.
Jamie laughed, but started to cough, stopping dead in the street as he coughed hard. Will brought out a handkerchief he had, even though it was old school.
You okay?
Will asked once Jamie had stopped. Jamie nodded.
Yeah, I'm okay. Come on, cancer can't beat me. Let's get those houses and head home.
Fred and Will nodded and helped him stand straight, both worried and wanted to let their friend have some fun. Will opened his bag.
Instead of getting more candy,
He pulled a dozen eggs out.
let's egg that old lady's house.
Fred shook his head.
Now let's do the one on the right that gave us no candy.
He took a few eggs. Jamie nodded as he took some as well.
Yeah, she's a little old lady and gave us a lot. Let's go for the house to the right.
They all headed down the street. Will threw the first egg to the house they had agreed on. It hit one of the top windows. Fred threw the next one, and it hit the house. Jamie joined in, but it hit the grass. The guys all laughed and kept throwing until they were out, the last one hitting the front door before they took off down the street. Once they were around the corner and out of sight of the house, they went back to walking. They got to Jamie's house first, making sure he was good. They got there a few minutes after 10, but his mother wasn't mad. "Thank you, Fred and Will. Happy Halloween!" She waved at them before closing the door. Fred and Will head back to Fred's house for their sleepover. Jamie was supposed to join, but with his health, his mother didn't want him away from home for too long. The boys stayed up late, checking their candy before eating a bunch, passing out before midnight in Fred's room. A creak in the room made Fred open his eyes. He checked his phone for the time. 12:45 it read. He groaned, not feeling great from all the candy. He went to roll over when he heard another creak from his window. He looked over at Will's sleeping body, or should have. Will was not there. Maybe he went to use the washroom? Fred thought. He looked over to the window that was open, his curtains moving slowly as the moon shone on them. He rubbed his eyes, trying to clear them. Another creak filled the air. This time, when he looked, he could see a figure close to him, standing over him. Before he could even scream, everything went black. When Fred opened his eyes again, he was tied to a chair. He looked to his right, and he saw Jamie and Will tied up with him, both still asleep. He tried to scream, but found unable to. "Oh, naughty boys can't scream," said a voice to his left. When he looked, he saw the little old lady from before, but she looked younger. "I hoped you would be good, but you disappointed me." Fred could hear the other two waking up.
What do you mean?
Fred asked, now confused why he could talk but not scream. "You boys egged poor Miss Jackson's house. Now since you tricked, I get my treat." Will groaned.
What is she talking about?
His voice was weak. Jamie looked around scared. He tried to scream, but found like Fred, he was unable to. No, you can't scream. I took that already. Speak all you want, but my spell bound your scream, silly boys," the old hag said, smiling with teeth. "I already found one treat this evening, and 3 more will make me so young again." She pulled a bowl close to her and started to cut up something they couldn't see.
What are you?"
Jamie asked, sounding very scared. The old lady looked at him as she tipped what she had into the bowl. A witch, but more accurately, a hag. She looked down at the bowl. "Now we're ready to start." She picked up the bowl and walked to them. "For a trick, I pick a treat. In the name of the gods, I call for payment of extended life." She pulled a black blade out from behind her back. Each boy started to yell different things. "Silence!" she commanded, and their voices disappeared, even as they spoke. "I take the blood," she continued on, her knife cutting Fred's hand and letting his blood run into the green liquid in the bowl. As it did, the color started to change, becoming yellow instead. "I take your life force to make my life whole once more," she said, taking Will's blood now. "With each, I extend my life 20 years. She took Jamie's blood last, and take your health as my own." With those last words, she started to drink down the bowl's liquid. They could all see the liquid turn from yellow to black. At first, they grew weaker, feeling like someone was stealing their energy, but then they felt it rush back. The hag dropped the bowl as she kneeled over in pain. Jamie started to cough hard. "What is wrong? How did the spell go wrong?" The hag screamed in pain. Her body started to grow older and older before she turned into nothing but dust. As she did, the ropes let them go. Will and Fred ran to Jamie, who was now on the ground, coughing hard.
Jamie!
They yelled as one just before Jamie coughed up something black, like thick tar, and rolled over, lying on his back, breathing hard. His eyes opened slowly.
Are you okay?
Will asked, kneeling next to Jamie. Fred made a face at that thick glop on the ground. It smelled like rotten garbage.
I haven't felt this good in years,
Jamie said, blinking a few times before looking at them. As the boys left the old hag's house, Fred spoke in a quiet tone.
Did cancer just save our lives?
Halloween Event by 242.
It was one of those stressful days. Nothing had gone right at work. So, once Dustin got home, he took a quick shower, washing the stress off him. He knew how late it was. His wife, Jen, was already fast asleep for work in the morning. He changed into some loose clothes before heading into his game room. As he opened the doors, soft lights came to life. The walls were covered with posters of his favorite games. His eyes fell on a Zelda one, his favorite. He had paid so much for that poster, and he loved it. After a few deep breaths, he let himself fully forget the day at work. Jack would be on his case tomorrow due to the order mistake, but there was nothing he could do about it. A beep brought the computer to life. The dual screens turned on as the lights on his computer hummed. His rig had cost him a pretty penny, but it was so worth it. He turned the lights off on the keyboard once he brought up the game he wanted. He did the same to the monitors, not needing them. He put his gloves on that were his controllers, and then he picked up the VR helmet. He took one more breath before putting it over his head. In a few moments, the game came to life before his eyes. A soft smile spread across his lips as he saw the words, "Welcome back, Sir Night Dragon Killer." He tapped the Enter Server button. A pop-up came up in parentheses. "The Halloween event has started, and we hope you enjoy it. Developers." His smile grew wider as he hit OK. It was a few days early, and they had been saying the event was going to be different than the year before. He couldn't wait to see what they had done. Dustin spawned into a small town he had disconnected in. It was night, and the road was covered in Halloween decorations. He walked over to one of the jack-o'-lanterns and looked at it, amazed at the detail they put in it. He swore it looked real and he could pick it up. He looked around as he heard a scream for help. As he ran towards it, he pulled his sword and shield out. He saw a pop-up on his screen, entering a Halloween world event. It disappeared after a few moments, and before him, he saw NPCs running away as an undead horde stumbled after them. A huge smile appeared on his face. They didn't normally do events in the city. This was really different. He charged into battle, casting Shield Bash to knock one of the zombies away from a woman who was trying to bite. He turned and slashed another in half, watching it fall down before turning to ash. One tried to walk up behind him, but he slammed him with his shield growing. The horde seemed to grow as he started to cut down each zombie. He took damage from their nails, but not enough for him to worry about. The zombies were slow and clumsy, and before he knew it, he had killed all of them. He was sweating in real life from all the movement he made to kill them. Normally, the fighting wasn't so intense. He saw a pop-up about winning the events and experience he had gained. He moved his character to a seat and sat him down before he did the same in real life. He looked around the area as he caught his breath. The moon was blood red, which he had not noticed before. He thought to himself how cool that was that he felt a sharp pain on his neck and his health went down. He got up in real life and the game, looking behind him. There was an NPC that had been attacked. "Oh shit, it's contagious," he said out loud before cutting the NPC down as well. That sucked. I hate cheap shots like that. He closed his eyes and took a breath before opening them up. On the top right, next to his health, was a debuff with a counter. It had 5 minutes on it. He looked confused because he had not recognized the system that they had used. It wasn't poison or mana drain. He opened up his menu to look at the Halloween notes, but it said nothing about a new status effect. He was frustrated at the developers for not saying anything, but it was over in 5 minutes anyway. He could just explore a little more and see what else they had done. Walking down the street, he didn't really see many other players, though the city wasn't the most popular and it was late. The timer was down to the last 30 seconds when he decided to head out. He walked towards the teleporting crystal. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. When the timer reached 1, he reached out to the crystal, but as he did, his brain shot into pain. He screamed and put his hands on his helmet, wanting to rip it off his head, but he couldn't. The pain seemed to sap his strength. His hands fell to his side and his avatar stopped moving.
The next morning, his wife Jen woke up to get ready for work. She was confused when she didn't see her husband next to her. She knew he stayed up late, but always came to bed eventually. She got out of bed, yawning and stretching. She got to her feet and walked out of the bedroom. "Dustin?" she called out into the hall. She checked the bathroom. Nope. Living room. Nope. "Oh, please don't tell me you fell asleep on the computer again." She walked into the kitchen and turned on the coffee maker. Once that was done, she headed to the game room and sighed as she saw Dustin sitting in his gaming chair with a VR headset on. "I really need to stop doing this," she said more to herself than anything. Slowly, she took his gloves off. His hands twitched a little as she did. She put them on the charger, knowing they were dead. She shook her head as she lifted the helmet off his head and placed it on its charger as well. When she looked back, she noticed his eyes were open. "Oh, Dustin, are you still awake?" She was very confused. It was very early, but he hadn't tried to do an all-night gaming session in several years. Dustin let out a groan as he looked up at her. His right eye looked like the blood vessels had broken, staining it red. His face looked pale, and he seemed to be shivering a little. Before she could speak, he got to his feet and ran at her. He pushed her onto his desk, making everything fall from it. Jen got her hands up to protect herself. The feeling of her husband's teeth biting into her arm made her let out a scream. She had never felt pain like this before. She pushed him away from her, making him rip some of her skin off of her arm. She let out another scream and tried to run for it. Before she got out of the room, she was pushed into the wall, her hand grabbing onto it and pulling the Zelda poster down as she fell to the ground. She rolled over just in time to see her husband's face, covered in her blood, coming towards her. She brought her arms up to defend her face, and he bit down on her fingers. She felt his head jerk to the side, and 2 of her fingers went with it. The pain flashed white hot for a moment, almost making her faint. With all her might, she kicked him between the legs, which made him stumble back and groan in pain. Jen got to her feet and ran out of the room, heading to their bedroom as fast as she could. There was a lock and her cell phone was in there. She moved as fast as her feet would take her. She could hear Dustin coming after her. He wasn't that fast. It seemed he was having troubles keeping steady. Maybe from when she kicked him? When she was at their door, she slammed it closed and locked it, just in time as she heard Dustin run into it and groan. The door didn't seem to want to stay. She looked around the room before moving their dresser in the way. She could hear him ramming his body into the door. Jen picked up her phone and dialed 911. As the phone rang, she grabbed a towel and wrapped it around her hand and arm. What the hell had gotten into him, she thought to herself.
911, what's your emergency?
A woman's voice said on the other side. The calm and collected voice made her immediately feel a bit better. Yes, hello. My husband attacked me. I need the police and an ambulance, please, Jen said, trying hard not to let her voice shake as she spoke.
Okay, ma'am. Where do you live?
I am at 5742 Evergreen Road, Jen said as she heard Dustin's body hit the door again, making her shake.
I have the police on the way, ma'am. What is your name?
Jen Smith, she said as she held her hand close to her.
Jen Smith.
The woman said as she typed it down.
Are you hurt?
Yes, my husband Dustin bit my arm and then bit off 2 of my fingers, she said, almost crying.
Is your husband on drugs that you know of?
No, he doesn't do drugs. He fell asleep on his computer, and when I took his VR helmet off, he had his eyes open, and then he attacked me, pushed me into his computer and then against the wall. Both times he bit me. Jen wiped her tears from her eyes. Her voice was shaking as she spoke about what had just happened to her. Dustin was groaning and kept trying to get through the door. He's slamming himself against the door right now. I don't understand what's happening. Please, get the police here soon.
They are on their way, Jen, and the ambulance as well.
The 911 operator said as calmly as she could.
Have you tried to stop the bleeding?
Yes, I have a towel around it.
Good. Now, I want you to get something to protect yourself. And what room are you in? Is the front door open?
I'm in the bedroom and the front door is locked. Jen looked around herself, not really seeing a weapon. The floor was covered in clothes and bed sheets. I don't have anything in this room to use as a weapon.
That's okay. Then just keep him out.
Jen nodded. Okay. She realized her eyes felt very heavy. Her body was starting to not really want to move. Had she really lost that much blood? Please hurry. I don't feel too good.
They are getting there as fast as they can. Please, try to stay awake.
Jen muttered something, but before she knew it, the world was black. Her eyes just wouldn't stay open anymore.
Officer Mackenzie's night had been an odd one. It was maybe 2 more hours till he was done with his shift, and he was looking forward to falling asleep next to his dog, Chester.
Patrol car 674, please come in.
Patrol car 674, he answered back.
I need you to head to 5742 Evergreen Road. It will be on your computer now. Domestic dispute.
10-4, he said before looking over at his partner Collins. He was a good man that was a little newer to the force. Here we go. Collins nodded before he turned the lights on and Mackenzie took off down the road. They flew down the streets. For a while the roads were empty. At first they were making really good time, but then they hit some traffic that was stuck due to a red light and everyone had trouble getting out of the way. By the time they got to the house, it had taken 15 minutes. The operator had told them the door would be locked, and also the woman's name was Jen, and she was in the bathroom. Mackenzie grabbed the door opener, as he liked to call it. Collins nodded as he got to the door, knocking. "Police, open up," Collins called, his hand on his gun. When there was no sound on the other side, Mackenzie came up and pushed the ram against the door, and Colin and him used it, opening the door. They let it drop before moving into the house. It was so dark inside, the blinds were pulled, making the entrance room really dark. It didn't help that the sun wasn't up yet. They both pulled out their flashlights and headed inside, with their hands on their guns. "Police!" Mackenzie called out this time. They walked into the house slowly, clearing the living room and walking into the kitchen. They could smell the freshly brewed coffee, mixed with a metallic tang. Mackenzie went to the door on the left and opened it. He found a room that was wrecked. The computer was mostly on the ground. He could see blood in a few objects as well as a poster on the ground with blood on it as well. "Clear." Colin moved to the right towards the small hall that led to the bedroom. One door was opened, leading to a bathroom. "Clear," Collins called as he saw no one in the bathroom. As he turned around, he could see blood on the walls. He moved slowly, following it. It led to a door that was busted in. Blood covered the door and a terrible sound hit his ear. He hadn't heard it until now as he grew closer to the door. His flashlight flowed into the room. He saw a dresser had been pushed out of the way and a man covered in blood. He was eating what had to be his wife. His hands and arms were covered in blood. Collins took a step back in shock. The sound was his teeth scraping against her bones. Slowly, the man stopped his eating and looked up at Collins, blood dripping from chin. Small chunks of meat stuck to his cheeks. "Sir, put your hands in the air." The officer put his hands on his gun as the man started to get up. "Sir, this is your last warning," he called out as the blood-covered man started moving towards him. He pulled out his gun and pointed it at the man. "Last warning." The man let out a moan before a bullet ripped through his heart, killing him within that shot. He fell to the ground next to his wife. Mackenzie ran over, his gun pulled out as well. "You okay, Collins?" "Yes. I think I killed him." They could hear the ambulance pull it up as Collins walked over and touched the guy's neck. "Dead." When Collins got on his feet and moved back, both of them stared at the scene before them. Jen was almost completely gone. Her body mostly eaten or ripped apart. It was almost hard to tell it was human besides the 2 feet that had not been touched. The officers looked at each other before leaving the scene. "We need a forensics team," Mackenzie called into his radio. "We have 2 dead bodies on the scene. Get the coroner out here as well." They were heading to the front busted door, where the paramedics were rushing up. The officers both shook their heads at them, and Mackenzie held up a hand. "Both are dead, and you do not want to go in there." The paramedics stopped dead and looked at them. "We really should check, though," one of them said. The officer's words seemed to shake her, but she knew she had to do her job. Collins walked down the stairs and bent over the garden as his guts spilled into the flowers. "Like I said, don't go in there. The less scars you get, the better," Mackenzie said, pulling a cigarette out as he moved out of the way. "Collins, grab the door opener when you're done, please." Collins gave him a thumbs up as he stood there, wiping his mouth. The paramedics headed back into their truck, getting their gear away. Mackenzie headed to the patrol car before he lit up his cigarette. He took out a long drag before he started to pull out the crime scene tape. This was not how he wanted to end his shift.
We have another attack on 77th Street, another on 42nd Avenue.
Called over the radio. The sunrise was a deep red, like the color of blood.
I would like to thank Hair-Raising Narratives, Kowai Poltergeist, Miss Creepy Tales, As the Raven Dreams, PA Nightmares, and Serafin the Midnight Bard for joining me to tell these tales this evening. Oh, thank goodness, I'm free! Now, if you enjoyed this video and this week, hit that like button and make sure it feels it. I also love to hear what you think down below or on Twitter. If you'd like to help this channel or podcast, share it with anyone who might like it. If you'd like to help in other ways, I have a Patreon, merch, and PayPal. Check out that tree link for all my links, including all my socials. I really hope you enjoyed this week. Please tell me what your favorite story was. I love to hear it. Thank you all for tuning in. Sleep tight and don't let 42 bite.